Ok, este și 32. Haideți să începem. Știți că cele 15 minute academice s-au redus la 3 în formatul virtual. Ok. Bun. Începem, da? Bună seara, dragi prieteni, și bine ați venit la al 4-lea episod al maratonului nostru, ediția a doua a seriei de 10 webinarii pe teme legate de managementul de proiect. Noi suntem PMI România și în această seară avem plăcerea să revedem partenerii de noștri din prima ediție a maratonului, tot cu o temă din spectrul change managementului, și anume Communicating in Change.
Pentru că am discutat că această sesiune va fi în engleză, eu voi trece la prezentarea Paulei și a lui Cristi în engleză, mai ales că știu că așteptăm și câțiva participanți care nu vorbesc română. So, hello, I am really excited to present you today two of the most amazing change managers that I ever met, which will actually share with us some of the insights from the change management world. Because as you all know, in project management, between 75 and 90% of the time spent by a project manager is in communication. This is why we need to have more insights about how to properly communicate and how to communicate mostly in change. Who are Cristi and Paula? Both of them worked with me in a very complex project. And this is how we ended up working together. They are as I said, amazing change managers. Both of them are certified in ProSci, which is I would say, equivalent of PMP in the world of change management. If this is not entirely true, Paula or Cristi, please correct me. Paula is from Câmpina and Cristi is from Novodar, and they will help us better understand from now on how to communicate in change. The floor is yours, Cristi and Paula.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and thank you very much for inviting us to join you for the second time. The first time we spoke about some change management essentials, and as you said, Julia, tonight we'll be sharing a few experience-based ideas for how to better communicate so that our outcomes are ultimately better in any project that that's at hand. I will start sharing my screen right now. So if someone can please let me know if my screen is visible. Oh, that's not mine. That's not mine. It's coming up. Mine is coming up. And you know what we could do, Cristi, if you can request access as well so we don't interrupt at a later point in time.
Done.
All right, let me go back to full screen. Okay, so my screen is visible, right?
Yep.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you very much. All right, so before we hit the road, let's maybe introduce ourselves, because I assume that not everybody who is with us today was able to join the first edition of the Project Management Marathon. And so since I have the privilege of sharing my screen, I'll just go first and say that my road, if I can call it that, in change management started 5 years ago. It started with I would say random occurrence, except I don't believe in random occurrences, nor do I believe in coincidences. But all that to say that it started with a big project. It all started with a work responsibility I was not prepared to, well, I wasn't prepared before I actually landed in that project. And I started learning about change management on my own because essentially I did not want to make a fool of myself. And as time went by and as projects kept coming along, I actually discovered that this is something that really makes me passionate, which is why for these past 5 years, I've started paving what I hope to be a long road for me in change management, because I'm really passionate about this people side of change, which is what change management is. And that essentially boils down to making it easier for people to get to from point A to point B, primarily in organizations, because we're still considering professional projects here, but also in personal settings. And you will see that most of what we have to share with you this evening applies to projects at work, but also to projects in our personal lives. The way I see change management, or a change manager's role, building bridges and creating connections between people. Because, for instance, if you're working in a corporation, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of siloed work, a lot of miscommunication, and a lot of resistance that stems from all of these things. And a change manager's job, among other things, is to get people and situations unstuck by trying to bring the pieces together. Christy, your turn now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Glad to see you again. And thank you, Christy and Yulia, again for the invitation. It was so fun the first time around, getting the chance to know you guys, taking questions. And so for today, just as a short reminder, I'm Christy. As Yulia mentioned, I'm from Novodar. So born and bred, Seacoast. Miss it a lot, haven't been for almost a year and a half. So waiting for the pandemic to end, lockdown to end, where I am in Ilfov, still quarantine for the past 2 months. So I've met my backyard a lot better than I thought I did a year ago. Planted things, so, silver lining and everything. I actually met Paula and Yulia at the office, and I actually got the chance to hire and work with Paula for a couple of years, and I was so excited at that. And our journey began together on that huge project. Learning about management of change, not just the communication part of it, not just the training part, but managing the people, because that's what we encountered and that's where we saw the need. We didn't learn because we wanted to. It was, how do I stop feeling so frustrated every day? How can I do it better? How can I avoid feeling this way? And honestly, in time, it became better. It became more fun. In time, we got certified. We started working on bigger projects, coaching other people, and trying to share as much as we can about the knowledge and the tips and tricks and ways you can strategize about change. You can't always control it. You can try to steer it as much as you can. I think that's enough about
that's pretty
me.
much it, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Got it. Okay, great. So before we take a look at our topics for today, there's one quick note that we would like to make, because it's good to just set some expectations here. Nothing that we'll be sharing tonight to this evening is completely technical or complicated. We like to think that the information is pretty straightforward, but we also know that change management is a relatively new discipline, and fewer people are familiar with it compared to the many people who are familiar with project management. And so please stop us if you have any questions. In fact, if there's anything to be gained from this evening's session, that's where we have things to learn from and really gain something from. So we want it to be an interactive session. Don't wait until the end to ask questions. If there's anything that does not maybe make sense, or if it's not very clear, stop us and we'll take a step back and try to do a better job of explaining. That said, the content that we're about to share for the next, I think, 45 minutes is meant to help you as project managers, because we assume that most of you here are studying to become project managers, because at some point in your career, you are very likely to be asked to double hat as a project manager and as a change manager. Now, if you were here for the first edition of the Project Management Marathon, you've heard us talk about the distinctions between project management and change management. They are two completely different disciplines. Project management is the technical side of change, whereas change management is the people side of change. And they are complementary, but they're not the same. And so please consider that context for everything that we are going to share. Also keeping in mind that if you're ever asked to double hat, which you probably will, this information will hopefully come in handy. And now on to the topics. Any change manager worth their salt needs to understand how people work, which is why the first topic that we are going to explore a little bit this evening has to do with people's reactions to change. It's no surprise to anyone that people are very different, hence their reactions are very different to change. And we'll just pause a moment to see how people respond to various changes at work, but not just at work. This is, by the way, one of the topics where you'll find some applicability at work and in your personal life as well. Then we'll look at the core principles behind the creation of a communication plan. As I promised, I consider it a promise, it won't be a technical presentation. We will rather focus on the questions one needs to ask before coming to a conclusion about what the communication plan will look like. Why did we want to do it like that? Because there's more value in asking questions, especially as a change manager, you need to ask good questions. We didn't want to come in front of you with a blueprint or a recipe because we don't believe in cookie cutter approaches. Rather, we believe in the questions that underpin a wise communication plan, and that's what we are going to share with you in a few moments. Then there are some 10 ideas that we would like to share with you for how to communicate in a way that is perhaps more mindful of how people respond to change, in such a way that at the end of the, let's say, of the journey, we will hopefully have more people supporting the change and fewer people opposing it. And last but not least, we will see why attacking this issue from multiple angles is the right way to go, as opposed to just taking one perspective and holding tight to that perspective. All right, so let's talk about change. Now, change is very rarely a straight line. For most people, it's actually a journey. It's a journey, as like I mentioned a moment ago, from point A to point B. And because people are very different, obviously, their journey in change will look very, very different. Now, when I, for instance, heard the very first rumors about the coronavirus pandemic, my initial reaction was, no, it's just the media. It's the next big thing. It's just meant to, get people to buy subscriptions to who knows what or whatever. And so my initial reaction was one of disbelief. And I was, in other words, in a state of denial. I didn't think this was really happening. For many people, the reaction is pretty similar, not just to the, the pandemic, but pretty much any change, especially if it's a change that they did not have a say in, and a change that is perceived as particularly threatening. And in fact, we all tend to feel some degree of fear when a change is announced, especially since we had no involvement in defining that change. And so the initial reaction, especially if there's not enough information, will be, maybe this is not happening, maybe this is just a rumor. It'll pass like many other things so far. Now, as more information becomes available, or in other words, as reality kicks in and it's harder to believe that this is not really happening, we move to a phase where we tend to cling to the past. we tend to think that whatever was before was much better, that the new change that is coming is probably not working. This is especially the case if, for instance, at work, you're doing the same kind of project for the, I don't know, the third or the fourth time, or even more than that. In fact, the project that that both Julia and Cristi mentioned, the one that gave us the opportunity to get to know each other, was the 9th project of that kind. And I think we all, the three of us, agree that one of the reasons why the company got to that 9th project is because the previous projects had not been managed properly from a change management perspective, from a people perspective, so to speak. And so with people who are kind of obligated to participate in the same kind of project for the millionth time, the reaction will be, oh, I've had it up to here. This is just another pile of, I'll stay away from profanity. This is another pile of stuff that is not working, and we'll end up with the same results as we have so far. So why are we doing this? Or others might say, another change? There are so many other things changing at the same time. Don't these people have enough of change? Why do we have to keep changing something? Are these people just bored? Do they just need some entertainment in life? So it can have a wide range of reactions of resistance. And one thing to note is that people have very different reasons for resisting change. We don't have time to go into that. In fact, that's worth a whole session on its own. But just know that people have very different reasons, and most of them are actually very legitimate. And they have to do with many different factors, which we can maybe explore on a subsequent on a future edition of the marathon. Now, as things get even clearer, as people even see some maybe incentives to go along with a proposed change, they go into the next phase where they start to think that maybe things are not that gloomy, and that maybe there's a way out. Maybe there's a way to make things work in the new context. And so that's already a change in perspective. Things are not, things are becoming a bit brighter, or in other words, you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel pretty much. Now, from there, if you're lucky, you get to the final stage where you're actually committed to that change, where you think, yeah, this was actually a good idea, or in the best scenario, you would say, yeah, well, I can't imagine how we've done things the old way for so long. We should have changed this a decade ago, and things are really better now. Now, one thing to note here is that not everybody goes through the various stages at the same pace, and not everybody will actually go through all the phases. For instance, some people will stop their journey when they're in the exploration phase. One other thing is that it's not even irreversible. So it's not like if you're in the exploration phase, you're not going to go back into the resistance phase. It's very, very possible. As you dig for more information, as more insights become available, you might actually discover that there are very legitimate reasons to actually oppose this change. So you'll just go back to the resistance stage. Now, in case you're wondering what determines the pace or the way people go through from one stage to the next, there are two things that come to mind. On the one hand, there's personality. So for instance, people who tend to be more conservative will spend more time in the denial and the resistance phases, whereas people who are always, who get a kick out of always changing something, they will be very fast to go to into the commitment phase. And then there are let's say the in-betweens who are very concerned with the practical aspects of making things work. And so they will tend to spend more time in the exploration phase. So that's one side of the, let's say, of the coin. The other side is the context. In other words, what is the organization doing to make it easier for people to change? Is it giving them enough information? Is it providing training? Is it making room for listening to objections and actually providing some thoughtful reactions and responses to those objections, or is it not? There are many things that are included in change management, and perhaps I should have started by mentioning that, especially for those of you who may not have participated in the first edition of the Project Management Marathon. Communication is just one piece, but there are many other pieces that are part of change management. So if you only rely on one aspect, such as communication, you're not going to fare very well. So, but tonight we're just talking about communication. So communication will be the backbone of change management. And this is why we're actually talking about it tonight, because change management will, and specifically the communication that is done specifically in this context, has the power to either create support or more support, or to maximize resistance if it's not done properly. So it's a make it or break it type of thing. Change management, when done right, and done right means many different things, is likely to get people on board with change and to minimize their resistance. And by the way, expect resistance by default. We'll come back to that in a few moments.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And let me just take it one step back. Yeah, So let me just keep on the slide for a little bit. You might recognize the path. And like Paula said, I've seen it a number of ways, depending on the complexity of the project or your personal initiative. Sometimes I say, this is not so bad. But then a few days later, I hate this update on my phone. It used to be so much better before. Do I really need to have it? Can I reset my phone? So this mindset is something that's inherent to us. I think the methodology or the mindset behind it was first presented about 50 years ago by Kubler-Ross. It was called the 5 stages of grief. It was initially about death, but honestly, it applies to everything. Any change, personal or professional, you go through this phase of first denying that it's going to happen, bargaining, trying to see, but can't I prolong it? Can we just wait another year until we deploy it? Can we wait until something else? Initially, there's going to be a resistance. And my personal frustration a lot of times is that we never account for it in our projects. We don't care about it. We're just going to say, we're going to steamroll through. We're going to do it, and people will like it or not, they're still going to do it. And I think that's why we end up with people frustrated with tools, with processes in companies. And on the personal side as well. I really like Paula's example, and I think I can relate a lot with the Corona example and the way we've felt communication over the past year, and not just in our country, but everywhere, I think is representative of the need of not being addressed right. Your needs are not being explored. You don't feel that this is presented in the right way. And like Paula mentioned, I hope most of you have joined our previous session. If not, just to summarize change management in an example. You can have the best tool, the best process, the best anything. If you don't convince the people to use it, that they need it, it doesn't matter. It can be a pricing tool. It can be Apple's latest phone. It can be the coronavirus vaccine. If you don't convince people that it's the right thing, you're still going to end up with something people don't want and won't use. Even if they have a problem, even if they're going to die from it, if you don't change the people, if you don't convince them, then you still end up in the same situation. And that's the same for any transformation in a company. And please let me know if you guys disagree or not. We want this to be dynamic as much as possible. We only have 4 slides for the entire session. So we want this to be interactive. Now, how do we lay the groundwork? And I think this is the biggest challenge that we have in all the companies I've worked in, because for every change, you need to look at 2 things, which you don't, or at least we never do enough of. Look who's impacted and in what way. A lot of times we just say, well, we're going to replace this tool with this tool, or this process with this process, and we're going to keep it the same. We're going to lift and shift it, or we're going to make sure that there's no gap from the current situation. But that isn't enough. it's not enough just to look at the tool side, just to be the best project manager you can. You also need to be the best change manager you can. You need to ask different questions, because part of the change is getting the people along with you, to embrace it, to adopt it, to want it. And if you don't care about what do the people impacted by this change do today, what will change in their experience, what's the benefit for them, because honestly, I'm so frustrated with emails coming in and saying, we're changing application X was set, and these are the benefits for my company. It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be simpler, it's going to be better, it's going to be whatever. But it's never, hey, Christy, as a person who does this thing in this application, this is why you should care. And honestly, if they did that, if they said, as a person who does this type of activity, as a person who buys for this application, as a person who makes a request for time off for this application, or as an approver, looking at the specific role you have within that process, within that change, alters fundamentally how successful you can be with your communication. So you need to look at the type of change and not just, oh, I'm changing a tool, so I don't need to take a look if any responsibilities change for that person. If today they create opportunities or submit quotes for products, or if they plan for new business or plan for emails for marketing, doesn't matter. You need to take a look not just at the scope of it, but for all the interlocks. Does this change also affect the processes that they use, their role? Do they need a different behavior? Do they need to do something different? And you need to ask yourself all of these questions in order to correctly map what people need to do different. Because if you don't ask yourself these questions, there's absolutely no way you can be successful in convincing people this is the right solution for them, just by doing the operational part and saying, we're changing A with B. These are the high level benefits. It's going to be live. That doesn't really address your personal needs, even at the office. So ask yourself, who's impacted? What's changing for each specific group of users? Because it doesn't matter what process, application, business you have, you're going to have people with different roles who use the application or whatever you have in different ways. No one has the same role, interest, or activity. And you can't paint with a broad brush, as I've seen a lot of time happen. So you need to make sure that you understand how you want that stakeholder to change, how you want them to change their behavior from today to tomorrow. You're changing something, but how does that impact them? And that's the first step. The second, as I'm sure happens to all of you, tons of emails. And every time I go to someone asking me for help to communicate something, I ask, who's the receiver for this? And they say, it doesn't matter, I just need to tell them what's been going on with my project. Fair enough, but who are those people? Well, it's my manager, it's his manager, it's the end users, it's the people who will see a change in the process. Okay, and what do you want to tell them? Well, I've done such a fantastic job. I've done this many user stories. I've updated the process. It's going to be better. Okay, and all of these people care about all of these things? Well, no. So you need different approaches for different stakeholders. You need to have a plan with different audiences in mind. You can't send one single communication to everyone, to all your different types of users, and expect everyone to infer the details. Oh, so I need to read 5 pages of whatever email or an FAQ guide to see what it really means for me and my role. It's essential that you do this pre-work to look at whose job's going to change as a result of this, who needs to approve this, who needs to provide expertise, and who needs to be aware. Not everyone needs the same amount of information, and the sooner you start to plan for that, the better your life is going to be. Trust me, I've seen it happen. Now, as we said, you have different needs for different roles. For some, management you're going to tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it. For different users, you're going to tell them what's the benefit for them if they move to the new platform, the new process. You need to be clear when you're going to do it, and don't overkill with communication. A lot of times I've seen super lengthy communications, training packages, FAQs, etc., where you just have endless pages of information. Okay, do they care about the trainers and when the system is going to be live and when it's going to be moved to production? Or do they just care about that one date when it's happening for them? Oh, but I'm sending it to 1,000 people. I can't be expected to send the communication. Well, this is when it's happening in Northern Europe, and this is when it's happening in Romania. And I don't want to put that level of work on me. And I think that's the challenge that you need to come to terms of. How much work do you want to invest to make sure that it's as clear as possible for people to understand the message you're trying to send them? A lot of questions are based on this change impact. So why are we doing this? Why are we changing? What's the current experience? What's the future experience? What action is required for them to go through this change? And what effort do you need from them? If you ask yourself these questions, and trust me, it's not going to be as easy as you think it is to answer these questions succinctly, clearly, in a concise way. But if you do answer these questions, it's going to be a lot easier for you to manage the change. And finally, when to communicate. So there are tons of methodologies, tons of examples. Plan for communications and understand that you can't spoon feed everyone and expect them to go from being aware of the project to being engaged, to having desire for it, to having the knowledge to adopt the change, and reinforcing it all with one message. You can't overkill with your information. It needs to be done in steps. You need to do it at least 5 to 7 times for people to pick up that information and have it in their mind. So make sure that you communicate regularly and clearly to them. And finally, understand what vehicles are best for you to communicate in. Is it emails? Is it meetings? Is it newsletters? Is it banners on a portal? You need to think about all the different methods and vehicles, which makes sense for you and which are more effective for communication. And we'll touch on this on my second slide. Paula, the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you're perhaps wondering, okay, fine. So what do I do with all of that? How do I actually put it in practice? Christy mentioned the importance of starting the right way. The right way means doing a stakeholder analysis and a change impact analysis in the beginning of the project. And when doing that, it's important to also look at any dependencies. For instance, in the corporate world, we have a lot of chains of dependencies. We often call them interlocks. And so we have to see, okay, we're using this tool, but where does this tool get its information from? What's the so-called upstream tool, or what's the upstream system that it's getting information from? And then another question that we need to ask is, okay, which other tool gets information from our own tool? So ideally, we would need to see the entire, if we want to call it, ecosystem with all its stakeholders. Not what I see very often, and Chrissy is experiencing the same thing every single day. People just look at in their own backyard, so to speak. They don't consider other people's impacts. They just look at, okay, how are our people impacted? Sometimes they don't even do that. But in any case, all that to say that when starting out any project, include this change impact assessment, because it will definitely save you a lot of trouble. It will save you a lot of headaches, I would say, down the road. And it will also give you the right foundation for all the communication planning, training planning, and other types of initiatives that you might attached, so to speak, to that project. Because I was saying in the beginning, we don't believe in cookie cutter approaches. And so the way you get to a customized approach is by doing your due diligence at the right time.
Yeah, if I could give a short example, sorry, Paula, promise
Yeah.
short. So on our project, for example, we ask what's changing. Nothing, we're migrating everything, okay? And we're looking at the data. Is anything changing with the data, with the tables of the reporting? No, no, no. Oh, actually, we're renaming a field. Okay, does that mean anything? No, 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 it's gonna be fine, no one cares. And then coincidentally, we're in a meeting with the reporting team who's telling us that they're taking all the data, doing reports, feeding it into other systems. But that's changing. Does that mean something for you guys? Well, all of our reporting will broke. Why has no one ever told us that you guys are doing this? So be aware of all the interlocks and try to ask. And sometimes you might not realize it, but try to look upstream and downstream, like Sylvia said, look at the ecosystem and see. Sometimes you don't even realize how much of an impact small things like renaming a field can mean for other tools.
You do realize you've just given me another name, right? Which happens to be one of my favorite names.
Sorry, I meant in the chat. I saw someone commenting on upstream and downstream and doing an end-to-end ecosystem view.
Yeah. It's no, I know. I just wanted to throw in a joke.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
shawarma for you.
It's absolutely necessary, and I cannot stress that enough. We see that stakeholder and that change impact assessment missing all the time, and it's not just useful from a change management perspective, it's also useful from a project management perspective. Now, the experienced project managers here don't need to be convinced of the, let's say, the virtues of having a proper assessment done at the right time. But unfortunately, some of the less experienced project managers and change managers omit that step. And then everybody pays the price down the road. Now, the second thing to keep in mind is, like I said, there's a technical side to change, but there's also a people side to change. There is this big transformation program in my company right now, where we're working with an external provider for some of the change management related aspects. And this provider is in charge of preparing a change impact assessment. However, we discovered that they're just looking at tools and processes. They're not looking at people. And so we obviously need to have that as well, because it's not just the systems and the tools and the processes that are going to change. People are going to have to change the way they do their jobs. And so it's worth looking into the people side of change, not just the technical side of change. Now, whenever we set out to manage a new project or to manage the changes that come with a new project, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what happened in the past. I was saying some minutes ago that we often see situations where a certain project is not happening for the very first time. And so with situations where the same type of initiative is being redone or reiterated in some way, it's worth taking some time to talk to people who were there for the previous projects, people who have valuable experience to share, lessons learned, things that they wish they could have done differently. These are all things that help us avoid the mistakes of the past, and to hopefully manage the change this time around in a less problematic way, so to speak. So definitely it's worth including this type of interview with various stakeholders in the beginning of the project, in the initiation phase, so to speak. Now, in terms of communication, it's we need to be very intentional about it. We often tend to think that communication is easy because, after all, we all talk every single day. However, communication needs to be formalized. It needs to be planned, because otherwise it just won't work. And it all starts, as Christy also pointed out, with understanding who the audience is. You'll know who your audience is if you've done your due diligence in terms of assessing stakeholders and the change impact. And then you also need to be clear about the objectives of your communication. In other words, ask yourself, what is it that I want these people to do at the end of the day? Is there a call to action for them? Do I just want to keep them updated? What is it that I want from them? And these two things will definitely guide the way you plan your communication. In any case, it needs to be planned. You cannot just leave it to chance. If you leave it to chance, then things will likely blow up in your face at some point in time, sooner rather than later. Now, in terms of also communication, think about it as something that can be grouped into 3 buckets. First of all, you want to create awareness. You want to have those things that can be considered awareness communications. These can be initial announcements, verbal and written. You can do focus groups, you can do listening sessions. There are a number of things that you can do just to build awareness of town hall meetings. Another thing you can do just to build awareness of what's coming. Then on the day of the launch of whatever it is, a tool, a process, whatever, it's good to send some so-called go live or some launch communications, if you'd rather call them that. That's just a way to signal to people that, hey, you know about that, you remember that thing we kept saying that it was going to happen? Well, now it's happening, and look why it's so exciting that it's happening. And then once it's happened, your job is not done. You will need to follow up on that to make sure that people are still on board, that they still understand what's going on. They still have an opportunity to ask questions and to even voice objections if that's the case. And that will be the case for many of them. And so it's good to keep in mind that it doesn't stop when the thing is out there. You have to continue with some very specific communication activities afterwards. This also is a reminder of the fact that multiple channels are advisable. In other words, if you have a certain message to get out, then just use multiple channels and also repeat the message. Don't think that just because you sent one email or you went on one call and did a presentation, that doesn't cut it. You have to do it multiple times for the message to stick. And the reason is very easy, very, very simple to understand. We literally get bombarded with emails, with all kinds of information, with notifications on our phone and so on and so forth. And so it's easy to lose focus. And so by repeating the same message several times and through multiple channels, with patience and with the understanding that people won't necessarily get it the first time, then you're setting yourself up for success, I would say. Now, rinse and repeat. What does that mean? Keep communicating. Keep saying the same things over and over again. You might think, okay, but maybe some people will say, what, you think I'm stupid? I got it the first time, the second time, the third time. Why do you have to tell me the same thing, I don't know, a 7th time? Well, it's true that for some people, once or twice will be enough, but for many of them, it won't, just because, as I mentioned, we're just bombarded with information from everywhere, and it's worth doing this same exercise, especially if your project covers a long period of time. There's an often occurrence that someone will say, well, these people knew from a year back because that's when we sent that message. Okay, but do you even remember what you were doing this time last year? I don't think you are. So why would you expect anyone else to remember something that you told them a year ago? So all that to say that communication is let's say a continuum. It's not just one thing. You've one action, you've crossed it off the list and that's done. It's not. When delivering information, it's really important to make it accessible. I think we've all been in situations where we've received something like, yeah, click on that link and it will take you to this page where you can download 30 slides and whatnot. It's a waste of time. It's an overkill for everyone. So one good way to approach it is to really make it easy. Try to put yourselves in the shoes of someone who's receiving that information. Wouldn't you want it to be very straightforward? Wouldn't you want it to have it at your fingertips with links, include the same link multiple times in the same deliverable if you have to. Don't make people scroll for ages, or spend time browsing through thousands of Excel lines or dozens of slides. Really make it easy. And the other side of this coin is simplify the message. Try to explain it as you would to someone who has no idea what you're doing for work, someone who has never been initiated to your line of work. So use the simplest of terms. I know that especially in corporations, the temptation is big to use big words because they show how smart we are, right? But that always backfires, because not everybody knows the same things. An acronym may mean something to me, but it won't it won't be the same thing to someone else. So everything needs to be very, very easy and simple. We don't like to spend time figuring things out. It also has to do with evolution, but maybe that's a topic for some other discussion. Now, one important thing to do in change communication, create feedback loops and create two-way communication mechanisms. There's also this temptation that I see a lot of people give into, which is to say, yeah, I've sent them an email. Sure, they know. How do you know they know? Sending something is one thing, but making sure that people have actually received it is a different thing. And then making sure that people have actually understood what you told them is a completely different thing. So there are these three layers to keep in mind. Of course, you first have to send something, but give yourself the opportunity to understand whether the intended recipient actually got your message and whether it translated to them the way it was meant to. So how you can do that? Well, how can you do that? Well, Q&A sessions, focus groups. You can also just create listening sessions where you just give people an opportunity to voice their objections and their concerns, which is likely to minimize a certain portion of that resistance that you're likely to encounter. Then remember that it's not for no reason that they say that patience is a virtue. Sometimes saying this makes me laugh because I must admit I'm not the most patient person in the world, but I have to remind myself every single time that people need time to process change. I need time. I need a lot of time to process change. So then it's easier for me to relate to people who are in the same situation. What does that mean? That means that on the one hand, in companies where, for instance, you have certain guidelines in terms of how soon or how much notice you can give people, there's another aspect, which is the mental time that people need to adjust to change. So on the one hand, you might have your deadlines. For instance, with customers, you might be under an obligation to communicate changes 2 weeks in advance or something of that sort. But then that's just one part of the story. The other part is that which tells you that people won't resonate and they won't jump on board as soon as you broke the news to them. So just give time. I know it's a challenge because we don't have time and everything needs to be rushed and it needs to be done, like yesterday if possible. But it's more realistic to come at it from this angle. And last but not least, and one of my friends who's here will laugh because I stole that picture. The problem is not the fact that you will encounter resistance. It's normal to have that. One thing that I see quite a lot when working, especially with senior executives, is this belief that on the one hand, just because people are not saying no, they're on board. And then the other I would say dangerous assumption that it's possible to not have any resistance at all. It's not possible. I mean, think of it in these terms. Outside of work, we don't have such a big issue trying to understand the fact that maybe Jane likes ice cream and John thinks it's horrible. As soon as John and Jane set foot inside their offices, albeit virtual these days, that kind of tolerance and understanding is right out of the window. And we tend to think that everybody needs to support and like the same things. It just won't happen. So any project, no matter how spectacularly managed it is on both sides, the technical side and the people side, there is going to be some resistance. So it's wiser to expect it by default and rather aim at minimizing it, because it's impossible to eliminate it completely. How can you minimize it? Well, do just what we described. Build in feedback loops, give people time, communicate properly, listen to understand their objections and their concerns. Take the time to provide a thoughtful reaction to that, and don't immediately jump to the conclusion that the person is the problem. The person is not the problem. The problem is when we choose to ignore objections, especially if they are very legitimate, and say, everybody needs to be on board. Whoever is not, we'll just pretend they don't exist. So expect resistance and prepare for it the right way. Christy, are you there?
Yes, I'm here with my trusty friend who was meowing at the door hysterically. Okay. So I agree with all of the points that Paula made, obviously. I think it comes down to how you want to execute on it. A lot of time we just think, like Paula said, I'm just going to send an email, assume everyone understood it. Sorry, assume everyone got it, assume everyone understood it, and that everyone's going to do it. But I think we all know that's not the case, not personally, not professionally. And it comes from not understanding what impact we have from the actions that we're taking. If I send an email, and I think we can all relate to this, doesn't matter if it's an email, if it's a video, I put up a website, the absolute best outcome you're gonna have is making sure people are aware of this change that you're working on. Doesn't mean they're gonna want to change, doesn't mean they're gonna have the knowledge to change or the ability to enforce it. The next level that you need to work on is making sure that people are coming along with you on the ride, that they understand what they need to do and they have the support they need. Like Paula said, you can have town halls, you can have listening sessions, you can have Q&As, doesn't matter what you call it. You need to make sure people really understand. It's not enough to just hold a training session and say, poof, my job is done. Everyone knows it, loves it, is going to do it. Because all of these things can only take you so far. Where you can make the difference and make sure that people understand why you want them to change, how you want them to change, is making sure that you do it in a way that will elicit action and commitment. And you can only do that if you understand how you do that. Because studies have proven that generic organizational corporate communications can only help with awareness. If you want people to care about what you're asking them to do, it can't come from Christy, can't come from Paula, can't come from anyone coming in as a consultant and saying, this is the best thing you can do, this is how you need to change. I don't care. My manager didn't tell me to care. My supervisor didn't tell me to care. What's in it for me if I change? Nothing. So you need to understand that studies have proven that 70% of people, including myself, say that messages, and I don't mean messages and emails, but the direction that comes from my manager and telling me, Christy, this is where I want you to go. This is how we're going to get there. This is what you need to do tomorrow. You should pay attention to this. It's something that matters. Don't ignore it. That's what's going to make me change, and everyone else. And ProSci and ACMP and every other change organization in the world will tell you the same thing. Messages need to come from managers, from supervisors. People have influence, respect, and authority. It can't come from generic project managers, change managers, whatever you want to call it. If you want to make sure that people listen and take action, it needs to be one-to-one action, team meetings. You need to make sure that they listen for feedback and they provide updates. And honestly, hey, let's climb up. Okay, now she left. This means that you don't just need to communicate yourself. Like we said in the last session, I know we have only a few minutes left. There are 5 things you need to focus on as a change manager. Communication is one, training is another, but you're also responsible for 3 other things. You're responsible for making sure that you have a roadmap for your sponsor to be visible and talk about the project and the change. You need to have coaching for the teams, and you need to manage resistance. And these 3 you are also responsible for. You need to create the talking points and the direction. You need to enable and arm the managers to have these discussions. And I've walked the walk and I've talked the talk. So I've put together, for every change that I've worked on in the past year, I've put together packages for managers. Hey, I'm not going to go to your people and tell them what they need to do different. They're not going to care. I've been there. I'm frustrated by that. So what I've done was I've taken the managers first and I said, this is where we want to go. This is what's going to mean for you. This is what you should tell them. Open the door for me. This is what you should tell them. And honestly, the results have improved dramatically after that. You need to have that open door by people with influence, authority, and respect, and it's not going to be you. As the project manager, as the change manager, however good, famous, liked you are, people don't really consistently change their behavior just through communication driven by the organization. And let me know if you guys disagree or have seen dramatic success just by sending communications. No matter how pretty, no matter how clear or concise, you need to have the support of the first line managers to be able to drive consistent change, because they're the ones who are going to have to reinforce it, to say, great job, Paula. I see you've adopted the new process. I see you have 70% of the whatevers in the tool. Or I've heard great feedback from your new whatever. It all comes down to having support and taking the people along with you for the ride. And you need to create that roadmap for them, for managers, for sponsors, for everyone on your project. It's not the one-man show. It can't be.
All right. Well, before we move to the Q&A session, there's a small disclaimer that probably we should have mentioned in the beginning. We were told that so far the sessions have actually gone over, and that actually the full hour could be spent on presenting material and then continuing with Q&A, with the Q&A. But in case anybody has a hard stop now, tomorrow, come back tomorrow, because tomorrow you'll be in for a very interesting session on artificial intelligence with Cristina Bogățeanu, who will essentially tell you about the risks or maybe the opportunities that are, let's say, hidden in artificial intelligence. And with that, let me stop sharing my screen, and perhaps we can take questions from those of you who are still able to stay longer.
Okay, I see a question from Krina, and if you don't mind, Paul, I'd like to take that.
Mm-hmm.
How would you minimize the resistance of change in case of efficiency and digital transformation projects? Overcome the fear that people could lose their jobs and motivate them to collaborate. Perfect question, and I've been on both sides. So in the past job, I was an RPA developer, and I've also been a change person for it. So, and there's actually a great case study for Tarsus that you can document later, because they had that same issue. They wanted to implement an RPA solution to automate their supply chain, to make sure that a robot does the work and people don't need to scan invoices, approve purchases, all of these things. But they failed spectacularly. People would not adopt it, would not train it, would not want to work with the new process because they did not manage the change part of it. They created the robot, they created the process, but they did not explain to the people why they're doing it, what it's going to mean for them. Everyone feared their job loss. So you need to be clear and concise. You need to have a plan and explain to them why are you doing it, what it's going to mean for them, and be transparent. If your plan is to fire those people after this is live, tell them. I mean, tell them. If your plan isn't, if you're going to automate this work and create new processes, new whatevers, it's going to bring you some benefits. If you plan to repurpose those jobs and give them other skills, other activities, other areas to work with, tell them that. That's what people need to hear, and that's what people fear when no one's talking about this and there's no forum where they can ask this. So have a plan and ask yourself, what are people going to ask? And that change impact that we both mentioned earlier, you need to ask yourself, how are people going to perceive this change? What are they going to say? And you need to have answers to those. So plan for it and be able to talk about what the impact is going to be for this in terms of tools, process, roles, and responsibilities. If you plan on a workforce reduction, there's no point in hiding it, honestly. You need to be open about this. And even if you plan to do it at a later stage, you need to say how you're going to retrain, reskill, move them to other opportunities. And that's what we've done in our own company. We've automated a lot of processes. We have a lot of robots, and really no one was fired. But yeah, you need good communications. You need to be clear about what's going to happen to them when that process or tool is fully automated. And I hope that
what I would add to that is perhaps the fact that it all starts with vision. What do I mean by that? When the powers that be decide that we are going to have some automation projects, it would be best if their vision included what is going to happen down the road to the people whose jobs will no longer be needed as a result of those projects. We also have some examples where in my organization where we're actually spearheading automation in our organization, and the vision was very clear. The people whose jobs wouldn't be needed anymore were shifted to other opportunities in data analysis. They were given upskilled opportunities so that nobody would lose their jobs. And the message there was very clear. This is how these new bots are going to make things easier for you and for everybody else. And that's actually a win for those people as well, because they're done with the repetitive jobs, they're done with the boring stuff pretty much, and they finally have an opportunity to take the next step in their career, and they're actually given support to do that while staying in the same organization. Now, granted, this will not be the case everywhere. So Krina's question is very very good. It's right on point. I'm afraid that where this vision lacks, there will be a lot of strife, a lot of frustration, and people will probably lose their jobs. Some others will maybe leave the ship before it sinks, because obviously who wants to go down with the ship? But I would say that and I don't think it's very idealistic to say that in those organizations where there is a very clear vision for those people, the resistance will be much less substantial, because with a vision and with the right communication in place, with the right change management in place, comes a lower degree of resistance. Christy, I see that we actually had another question before that, which is, which are the criteria to decide a change was completed before starting the next change in the same domain? Is there a minimum duration between two changes in a row? You could consider organizational changes, for example. Now, in terms of completing a project, there are two sides of the story. Of course, you'll have the indicators that have to do with project management. Did you actually deliver what you needed to deliver? Did you deliver it on time? Did you deliver it on budget? Did you deliver it at the quality standards, at the based on the quality requirements that you were asked to observe? Yes or no? That, and I'm sure there are many other project-related or technical indicators to be considered, and of course that will vary based on the specifics of every project. From a change management perspective, there are three things that you would want to measure. First of all, the speed of adoption, which is another way of saying how fast can people move from point A to point B. And then you also want to look at another indicator, which tells you how many of them actually made the transition from point A to point B. But of course, we don't just want quantity, we also want quality. And so this is why we have to ask the question of how well are people performing now that they're in point B? So these are the three indicators that you would want to consider from a change management perspective. So I hope I've answered the question. Now, in terms of how to measure these things, they all depend on the specifics of the project. So for instance, if we had a very concrete example at hand, we could probably try to come up with a few ideas for how to measure those things. But just so you know, there, from a change management perspective, you only have these three indicators to care about pretty much. And you also have to figure out a way to measure them based on the specifics of your project. And finally, in terms of a minimum duration between two changes in a row, to my knowledge, there's no prescription to that effect. I will say, however, that change saturation is very real. In a corporate environment, and I probably tend to come back to that example because I work in a corporate environment. There are a lot of things changing at the same time, and most of them, let's say, take a toll on the same number, the same people. And so it's very important, again, to come back to the notion of enlightened leadership. It's very important to figure out what the right amount of change is, what the right timing for those changes is, which is why, for instance, for those of us who get trained in the ProSci methodology, one key aspect to consider in the initial phase of a project is the level of readiness of any organization that wants to go through change. And that's where you have to consider things like history. How many times have we done this in the past? How well was that change managed in the past? What happened? Where did we stumble? What did we learn from those projects? How can we avoid falling into the same traps? How ready is the organization really for this change? And I know that for many of us, it's impossible to say, yeah, we cannot have this change right now because people are just not ready for it. The way it usually happens is there's a top-down decision, pretty much. So you have to make the best the best of it, considering these circumstances. But one thing you can do, if you're a responsible change manager, you will at least warn the leadership team about the potential risks of engaging in a new change too soon. So I hope I've answered the question.
Except the last one, maybe.
No, the last one was, is there a minimum duration?
No, there's a
no.
question.
Yes, I know, I was just scrolling.
Regarding the buy-in, yeah, the last one. It's not the last one, but anyway.
It is necessary to have, is it necessary to have buy-in of teams? How can you create this from the start of the process, not during the process? That's a great question. That's what keeps us up at night. You have to be straight with people. And unfortunately, you don't get to see that in many teams, in many organizations. What do I mean by that? Be very, very specific about what is changing and why, what is the risk in not changing, and also what is not changing actually. Because that works like some sort of mental anchor. People want to be able to cling to something and have that, if only, at an illusion, in the form of an illusion, that some things are not changing. So it has to be very, very clear. Now, Christy also mentioned the importance of stating the benefits. It's true that not every change will have obvious benefits for the people. It will obviously have benefits for the organization, because otherwise, why would we be doing it in the first place? Either we're making money or saving money. But what's in it for people? If we can connect that to people's interests, to people's motivation, then that's already progress. Now, ideally, we could show them tangible benefits That's not always possible. What is possible is to make the vision clear for them and show them the place they have in that vision. In other words, show them that there's a future for them. Show them that there's a future, a vision, not just for, you know, how bright the future of the organization is. Show them that there's something concrete that they will be able to do. And if there can be some clear convergence between their aspirations, their motivations, because remember that pretty much every evolved human being wants to make a difference. They want to live a life of and with purpose. And so it's important to try to think about, okay, what do these people care about? Can we show them how they're actually contributing to the next big thing in our industry or for our company? These are ways to create buy-in. Another way to create buy-in, as we said, create two-way communication. Don't just send emails or rather, so to put it that way, communicate with people, not to people. And that's likely to get you more buy-in.
Thank you, Paula. I see another question.
Thank you.
What do you think about using portfolio management to manage the simultaneous changes together? I think that's a perfect example, and that's what we've been doing in my company. So for the past 6 months, maybe more, seems like it's been going on forever. We've been trying to take a hold of the 20 to 30 transformations that we have that are managed separately, and we're trying to manage the change to them with one single voice, one single brand, and talking to people holistically. It's an absolute nightmare, honestly, to pull together, but I think the results are good if you manage to look at the 5, 10, 20, as many changes you have, and trying to look at the different experiences and personas you're impacting. In our case, we wanted to look all of the activities that we're doing, try to feed them for that change impact. And I created a little tool so that everyone can put in the same kind of text in the same way. We looked at exports, we compared, and we put together what's the vision. We retroactively created our vision to see what was our vision and what was the portfolio of changes that we're driving. And now we're in a much better place to go and say, dear Mr. End User Sales, this is what we're doing for you in UK and I. And dear partner reseller, this is what we're doing for you in North America, and all of these things. So I think that's a perfect analogy to use it. But you do need a very good change impact, looking at what are you doing, and especially who are you doing it to make sure that they're engaged and you can speak to that level of detail and granularity.
So I think these were all the questions we had in the chat window. If anyone would like to ask anything, shoot.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you both very much for this consistent presentation. I was expecting this level of quality, and change management. It's always a very significant topic for project managers, because this is what they actually are doing. They manage changes because the projects are changes. So I would like to make a small comment on something that you said, Paula. There is no technical part of the project and the people part of the project, because the technical part and people are inside the project. Project means work. Yeah. So if maybe you can say the technological part of the project. Yeah, because all the project team members are doing some actions in the project. So you cannot divide these two things. Yeah. Sometimes the projects are meant to change something non-technical. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to make this very clear.
That's a very useful comment, and you're right. When we say technical side of change, and perhaps I should have said quote unquote technical side of change.
Yeah.
When I say that, I mean the tangible deliverables. For instance, you need to launch a new tool or replace a tool, or maybe there's a new process, or maybe there's a job role that is changing. Let's say that's the tangible aspect of the change. The subtle, the soft aspect of the change is what we call the people side of change. And as Chrissy also pointed out, you could have the most wonderful tool in the world, but it will not use itself. You will need people to understand it, to learn how to use it, and actually to want to use it. And so you're right, they go together, which is why we say that project management and change management need to go hand in hand, even though their area of focus is very, very different.
Right. Fully agree with you. Yeah, if any other questions from the audience, yeah, dare to ask something, you can open your video and audio. Let's take advantage of this experts in the change management here to address more questions. Okay,
let me be provocative. What are your challenges today? Where do you need help? What question can we help you with? What challenge can we assist in?
well, let me try to put the finger on the spot. Well, it's obvious that the projects and the changes in general should be or have to be facilitated by good communication. So without communication, it's very hard to imagine how to promote changes. The point is that very often people are very reluctant to express, to speak up. And this is the point, because the risk is to lose very valuable ideas, insight, or valuable information that are not propagated properly. The question is why people fears to speak up, to talk openly.
For many of them, it's a fear of being judged. For many of them, and one thing that one note I want to add in here, because it will actually give color to my entire answer here. I think it has a lot to do with culture, with the cultural setting you're operating in. I think we kind of touched on this topic on the first edition as well, when I mentioned that. For instance, let's take Romania as an example, because I believe that most of us here are Romanian. Romania comes with a heavy burden of, half a century of communism, pretty much. And when you've lived under communism for that long, you learn that it's better to keep quiet. You don't know who to trust. You know that the slightest, the one wrong word, one wrong sentence can get you in jail, or can get you, dead, pretty much. And so this is how you learn to keep quiet. Then in the workplace, that translates as, oh, I'll keep quiet because I don't want my boss to be upset, because who knows, maybe they'll kick me out. The pandemic is hard, people are losing their jobs. It's better, let me just keep quiet, because this way I won't be perhaps on the blacklist of people who get sacked. And so unfortunately, we don't realize, I think, as a people, but that's probably topic for a different conversation, that this is doing us a great disservice. Now, in my organization, most people are, I would say, or the average, many people are in their 30s. And so you could argue that these people haven't really lived under communism for too long. And so you tend to think that they're more brave, let's say, in asking questions and expressing dissent, but it's not necessarily true, because mindset is some sort of inheritance. You see that at home. That's what you learn from your parents, and that's the baggage you carry throughout your lifetime, unless you become aware of what's going on, of the influences in your environment. Unfortunately, that for many of us, means that we don't speak up, we don't ask for what we need. We grow resentful because sometimes we expect our leaders to just somehow magically assume or guess that we want a specific thing, and so we're reluctant to ask questions, to ask for what we want. We don't like to put ourselves out there, because let's face it, when you're in front of people, when you're can I ask a question? Everybody's looking at you, and our school system also discourages this type of attitude, because you'll be in front of everybody daring to ask a question, and then you might see people giving you a weird look or a nasty look, and thinking, or even saying, "Oh, you're so stupid for saying that." Nobody likes to be judged, and so it's an act of courage, probably, to take a step and to speak up. I wish something changed. We're talking about change, right? What I will say, however, is that I'm very fortunate, because where I work at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, I work with a lot of leaders, and some of them are extremely open-minded. They make it a point to encourage people to speak up, to ask questions, to voice their objections, and that makes a world of difference. We actually have one of these leaders here, whom I haven't had the pleasure of working with so far, but we've interacted on a number of calls, and he's great. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that, and so when you have the opportunity to work with these people, you understand that it's not for no reason that they say that leadership and change management have a lot of touch points. Change management is actually a lot about leadership. And when you have an opportunity, as a change manager, to work with that kind of leadership, you know that that's where you will have more honesty. You'll have more people speaking up without fear of reprisal. And you'll have more perspectives considered, which at the end of the day is the key to everybody's progress, pretty much. So that was a bit of a long answer, but
long answer, but pretty much a complete one. So I'm fully satisfied by the answer. Yeah, indeed, it's about the culture, and you mentioned some things about the national culture, but we are talking more and more about the organizational culture that governs our lives in project management, and the organizational culture could be easily shaped, could be easily more easily that's for larger groups like a nation, yeah, and the leadership plays the central role in creating that psychology safety kind of culture in which you can express yourself without fearing of being judged, blamed or making fun of, So that is the critical aspect from my point of view.
Exactly. It all revolves. It all starts and ends with leaders, because they essentially give life to an organization. They shape its culture. Unfortunately, I see many cases where change management and employee engagement, people engagement, these things are left to the HR department, to change managers, even to individual contributors. I have personally been in a situation where one of the managers that I used to work with seemed to think that just because I was, the people person, the change manager, and I was doing employee engagement and programs and things like that, I was ultimately responsible for the engagement of the people in that group, on that team, which was not the case. It's one thing to come up with suggestions. It's one thing to make a proposal, but ultimately the responsibility is on the shoulders of the leaders. And Ramona is asking a very good question that is related to that. She's asking whether multicultural organizations can encourage communication. I would hope so. But again, it also depends on who the leaders are. Because if you could have a multicultural organization, but if at the top you have leaders who come from a background where speaking up is not appreciated, then yeah, sure, you will have a multicultural organization, but the personality or the style of those leaders will reflect on the organization as a whole, pretty much. And yeah, Sylvia says it's desirable, but not a guarantee. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think having joined companies from Romania, other countries in Europe, and even working with a lot of Americans, it really helps. It's better to work with multiple countries, because it increases the odds of having more balance in the organization. And like Paula said, you can have even Americans who are usually so lighthearted and fresh and can talk to you about anything and can spend an hour talking about anything without touching the work part, which I'm not very used to being Romanian. So I'm like, we're here. It's 2 minutes past. Let's get it done. Like the French, like others. But it's good. I think multiculturalism is good. And I think it can encourage communication, but it needs to come from the top, and managers need to encourage that. Like Christy said, psychological safety is super important. I shouldn't worry that I'm going to be judged, ridiculed, or thought stupid for asking a question or proposing something, or fearing if I do it. And trust me, I've asked a lot of stupid questions a long time, and no one's ever judged me publicly for it. And I still have a job, so it's good. And I'm happy with my
Christy, we've been talking so much about the role of leadership, and maybe people are asking, okay, leaders, but what do you actually do as change managers? And change managers are unfortunately misunderstood as in the sense that for many people, change managers are on stage, which they're not supposed to be. Change managers are supposed to be trusted advisors to leaders, trusted advisors who can help create sponsor leadership activities plans, communication plans, training plans, and so on and so forth, resistance management plans. And they can be a step-by-step
roadmap.
Coach. Yeah. Exactly. They can help with all of these things. They can take care of the assessments that need to get done in the beginning of the project. They can create all those plans. They can coordinate the activities. They can even execute many of the change management activities. But at the end of the day, whether or not a change succeeds is up to the leaders of that organization. If they're active, if they're visible, if they're involved, if people see them excited and participating along the way, as opposed to just showing their faces in the beginning and at the end of the project, that makes the difference. So all that to say that let's say the lead role in change management is actually the leader. That's who you should be seeing on stage. But behind the scenes, in the backstage, they should ideally have a trusted advisor who will be this change manager to help create strategies and plans along the way. So
Great.
I have a question, if I may.
Of course.
My question is related to this kind of situation. Let's say that people from an organization only pretend that they are embracing the change, while in fact they do whatever they can to reject that change. And which would be a good approach in this situation? What can be done?
First of all, you have to figure out what kind of resistance you're up against, because resistance is not just, let's say, one-sided or there's just not, it's not unidimensional. Resistance can have very, very subtle nuances. So for instance, you'll have people who will say, yeah, sure, this is great, let's do it. But then when you start having calls or when you start asking them to deliver things, you'll see that they either miss calls or they deliver, they wait for the deadline to pass. They need a ton of reminders to actually start getting their job done. And unfortunately, if you're just starting out as a change manager, that tends to be very misleading, because let's face it, what do we all want to hear in projects? Yes. Why? Because that makes it easier for us. It makes it easier for everyone. And so when you're just starting out, you hear yes, and you tend to think, oh yes, that person is on board. It's easy. We're just going to get it done. So it takes a little bit of practice, I would say, to start reading between the lines. Also, if you have the let's say the benefit of having worked in the same organization for a long time, you start getting to know people. And so you slowly start to know who you can rely on and who is likely to just say, yeah, this is great, but they're not going to lift a finger. There are various layers of resistance that you can identify. But the first step is to identify the type of resistance you're up against, and then you have to address it, right? And it's preferable to address it sooner rather than later, because later means the problem has only gotten bigger. It's not going anywhere. It's just getting fatter. And so you don't want to wait until that's the case. You want to spot it. And if you're, for instance, a change manager, you want to be talking to the manager of those people to get a feel for their level of understanding. Are they even aware? Because, there are many situations, I've been in many situations where the people who were impacted by the change would tell me something, and the leadership team would tell me completely different things. And this is why I was saying in the beginning that I see my job as a connector, as a dot connector, or as a bridge builder, because the perceptions were completely different. And these two, let's say, groups had no idea about the other group's perceptions. It took a bit of back and forth between the groups to finally get them to communicate directly and to see where the disconnect was happening, and how the situation was could be let's say unblocked. But definitely you would first want to see whether the manager of that team is even aware that this is happening. You'd want to see whether they understand this is happening. But let me be very clear about this. It's not with the intent of having the manager go in and say, you need to do this or else. No, it's rather probing into the level of connection between the manager and the team. This is why Cristi was mentioning that coaching is a very important part in change management. It's one of those key elements. Coaching is more about asking questions. It's not necessarily about giving answers to people. And so what a change manager can do, among other things, is to train, let's say, direct managers and supervisors on how to coach their teams, how to listen to their teams, how to understand the messages that are coming in from their teams. That's always the starting point. And of course, depending on what the cause is, the cause of the resistance there, then the most appropriate answer or reaction can ideally be defined. But it all has to start with these conversations, which are sometimes difficult. But it's better to have those conversations rather than just knowing that there's an elephant in the room, that no one is acknowledging, because that'll backfire on the project itself, but also on the team and on the relationship that the manager has with that team. Did I answer the question, Liliana?
Yes, thank you very much. I was thinking, what if the managers are the ones who have this kind of resistance to change? Can it be considered a difficult situation?
It is.
Yes.
It is, and many managers actually do resist change for many different reasons. Sometimes it has the proposed change has nothing to do with their goals and their objectives. In many cases, there's a lack of awareness and understanding, which is also a very common, or actually the most common reason for resistance on the part of let's say, contributors, or if you want to call them regular employees. There are many different reasons why this is happening. Another interesting reason why some managers resist change has to do with some lack of faith in their own ability to deal with people. We've all seen, I think, many managers who actually got to where they are in a management position, not because of some special soft skill set, not because of some inclination to deal with people in the right way, but rather thanks to their technical knowledge, their operational skills. And in those situations, of course, those people will probably find it a bit more difficult to relate to people, to express empathy, to even feel empathy, than to express it and to really relate to people. And those are really challenging situations, but they can be surmounted depending on what the context is like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Paula, let me ask you, did you hand over the baton to tomorrow's speaker?
Yes, before going into the Q&A session, yeah. Because I figured that not everybody would be able to stick around.
I just wanted to make sure that better later than never. Okay, thank you. So, any other questions? Last call.
Curfew at 8 p.m., guys. Last call.
Today's not Friday, though.
I have another question.
Sure.
I'll take that one.
Can the principles of change management be applied on ourselves?
Yes. Any change can be applied to it. And it's important, honestly, that you do. So I tried to make a change to the way we're executing on change management in the company, and it did not work at all. And I was so frustrated until I actually applied change management to my change initiative. And getting people to adopt a new way to work on change, to fill in new templates, to look at information differently, to look at stakeholders differently, until I actually ran a strategy and said, this is the plan to get there. This is how we need to get the feedback for it. It couldn't just be executed. You need to have a plan if it's a big change. So I definitely recommend it even for personal changes. If you want to stop smoking, if you want to start a new sport, if you want to make a conscious decision to change fundamentally something in your life, it works if you think about it through this lens. And change management honestly doesn't need to be a huge methodology like process. It's just the mindset, asking the right questions. Where do I want to go? How am I going to get there? Who else is impacted? And it can be applied to anything in life. Because honestly, after years, I realized that change management is common sense a lot of times. And as nice as we would think it is, we don't really apply that much common sense in things we do. We send out communications to everyone without caring if they should read it, if they should care about it. We spam people with things. We don't put enough heart into things. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
One of the two amazing people who actually initiated me in change management this year. So Cristian, hi, and thank you for being with us now. It's a great pleasure to see you here. And I remember from when I got trained and certified around 3.5 years ago, Cristian made us go through an exercise which helped us understand how the ProSci framework was going to apply to personal changes as well, not just changes at work. And how it worked was we were asked to come up to think about a change that we were hoping to make, or a change that we were trying to help someone else to make. And there were 5 elements there that we needed to think about. The first element was called awareness. How aware were we of the need to make that specific change? Why did we need to make that change? Did we even realize that a change was needed? Then there was an aspect called desire. What's in it for me? What incentives do I have to make that change? If I were, for instance, to go back to Christy's example about smoking, what would I have to gain out of quitting smoking? Would I be able to feel better? Would I feel healthier? Would I save money? Would I don't know, have a happier family because they're not as worried that I'm going to have a stroke or something? Or, you know, many different things. These can all be categorized as incentives, things that spark my desire to make that change. Then there's an aspect called knowledge. Do I know what I need to be doing in order to make that change? In other words, how do I act, technically speaking? How do I go about quitting? Some people say you can quit, progressively. Others say no, you have to cut it. To draw the line in the sand, and that's where you stop. Others can say, yeah, well, you can use all kinds of chewing gum type of thingies. That's the knowledge. What exactly do you need to do in order to make that change? Then there's an element called ability. Okay, so now let's say you've trained yourself, you've educated yourself on what you need to do, but are you actually able to apply it? If, for instance, you are going to walk into your kitchen every single morning and you're going to see your beautiful pack of cigarettes on the counter staring at you, you're not going to be able to resist the temptation too much, because it's right there. So it's not that you don't know that you need to stop smoking. It's just that you're not able to apply what you've learned, just because the environment you've created for yourself in this particular situation doesn't encourage you to stick with that change. And last but not least, there's an element that is called reinforcement. In other words, what is actually going to keep me going? Let's say I quit for a month. What is actually going to convince me to keep going at it? Perhaps I want to install this type of app on my phone. One of my friends has it, and it shows him the many days of abstinence. And every single day obviously adds to the count, and that motivates him to keep going, because he's now already seeing 4,000, I don't know how many hundreds of days of non-smoking, and that keeps him going. But people are different, so they will be motivated by different things. I know someone whose only reason for quitting smoking was because he wanted to save money for a car, and so for that type of person, the incentive will be a bit different. What will keep him going will be his savings account, right? That looks prettier and prettier. So and you can apply this let's say this framework to really any change that you're trying to make at home or at work. That's the beauty of it.
Yes, and I suppose that we need to find a strong motivation so that we can cut some pleasure off, let's say. Because
it's true, but sometimes motivation is overrated. And why am I saying this? I like to read a lot of stuff from the behavioral economics sphere, and one thing that I've learned from one of the best scientists in the field is that motivation is not constant. And so if you are going to rely solely on your, let's say, willpower, your motivation, that'll only get you so far. For instance, throughout the day, your motivation is at its peak in the morning, let's say, because you've got energy, you haven't been forced to make a lot of decisions. The more decisions you have to make throughout the day, I was reading a book that says that just in terms of what we eat, just in terms of food, we make up to 200 decisions per day. Shall I eat that? Shall I eat that? Do I want to get that size or that size? Do I want the big container, the small container? Do I want the blue cup, the red cup? Things like that. So up to 200 decisions per day just related to food. Can you imagine how many decisions we have to make every single moment about everything else? And so throughout the day, as we keep making all these decisions, our energy, starts to decrease, and with it, our motivation as well. So I wouldn't say just rely on motivation and willpower, but rather engineer your environment, if you can, in such a way that you will need to make fewer decisions, that will put less strain on you, and that you can really keep your energy for those things that really matter. Because otherwise, at the end of the day, you'll say, I've had enough. I'm just going to have this morning. I just wanted this small, candy, and now I want to have a burger. I want to have fries, and I want to have that sundae too. And you won't be able to fight it because you've spent your energy for the day.
Paula,
yes, thank you.
Let me add a very subtle nuance regarding the number of decisions to be taken regarding the food. I tend to believe that man needs a lot fewer decisions about what to eat and how much to eat, comparing with the women. Yeah. So just bring me a huge steak and 2 beers, and that's it. So case closed.
Case closed, yeah.
Not only, it's just a half of joke, not only about the food, but about choosing, generally speaking, choosing clothes, foods, or other things. Yeah, we have, simpler minds and can take decisions faster. Maybe not always are better, but faster they are.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, the true last call is now.
I have something to say.
Go, shoot.
So first of all, thank you for the presentation. I was quite impressed, to be honest. I am also fascinated by the change management topic, because yes, change is the key of everything that is happening around us day by day, and especially in a project manager life. I do not have a question, but I have something to, let's say, add to what Paula has mentioned in the last, 30 minutes, maybe more. And first thing, it is related to the level of frustration that unfortunately can be seen and noticed around managers and even leaders from Romania. If you are, let's say, an employee in a team, yeah, and you have a manager or a leader who has a huge level of frustration, even if you are a manager or a very good normal employee and you have an idea of changing something, that person will never listen to you. And the more you push on changing something, even if your ideas are good, in the end, you'll be the one that will be put in a bad light. And even you'll be, in the position of being forced to change the company or change the team, because that manager will make your life miserable. Why? Because you had some good ideas, and that manager is very reluctant to change. That was the first topic, and this is from my own experience. And like you, I was
an HP employee 10 years ago, and I had to leave that company due to this kind of attitude, unfortunately. I really was one of those people that left people and not companies. I was, quite emotional leaving that company. And the second thing that I want to mention is a book called The Power of Habit. And it is very interesting, that book, because I haven't finished reading it. Maybe one day I will finish it. But it is quite interesting to read actually how this thing, habit, actually controls our life since we are a child. And habits can be found everywhere and in everything that we are doing, like in the morning, what you are doing in the morning. You are waking up, you're going to the bathroom, you are turning on the coffee machine, you are having the coffee, reading some newspapers or turning on the TV and so on. So this is something that you are doing day by day and you are not even thinking. But if you want to change that routine that you have day by day, and adding, I don't know, a new habit, you will have to make, an effort.
It's true.
Like,
we are creatures of habit.
Yeah. And,
which is why it's even more important to pay attention to change management, because people will obviously tend to cling to their habits. It's normal. It's the case for everyone. Bye, Christy. On that other note, I'm really sorry that you had to go through this. I guess that there's no perfect environment, and just because some people are lucky to be in an organization and to be working with great leaders doesn't mean it's the case for everybody else in this organization. Exactly. I'm really sorry this happened to you. I can only say that I hope that in the meantime you. Well, this was 10 years ago, but I hope that in the meantime, your other adventures, let's say, gave you more opportunities to put your good ideas into practice. It's true that, as I said, it all starts and ends with leadership.
Yeah, indeed. And nowadays, I think that, I somehow visioned, about 12 years ago that I'm going to have the greatest manager ever, even if 12 years ago my life was miserable from this perspective. And I visioned this so much. So about 3 years ago, I had, let's say, the chance, the luck, anything that you want to call it, to have even now an amazing manager who has all the qualities that you have mentioned. He has empathy, he has a great open mind, he has this ability of being a real leader and know how to lead the entire team through the change management process and so on. So it is amazing when you have such a manager.
It is. It's life-changing.
You cannot describe it to somebody that doesn't have the same kind of manager. Yeah.
It's true.
So thank you again.
Thank you too.
Because we talked a lot about the leadership and about leaders, let me recommend you a book.
Mm-hmm. Leaders Eat Last. Yeah.
So Simon Sinek, Raluca, I strongly recommend you this book.
I will write down the title. Actually, so, since this marathon started, I have written down some titles of books because knowledge is always very good.
Indeed. Well, another pleasant evening spent together. Hopefully we will meet again, Paula and Christy. We would like to have you again because we're going to have more and more marathons. This is just the second edition, and we're getting better and better, hopefully. So If no other questions, I would like to propose you to close this session now.
If no other questions or comments, let me thank you very much again for the invitation, Cristi and Julia. And I also want to thank everyone for having made time to join us, especially since we've gone over. And
Yeah.
I hope this was useful. If there are any questions at any point in time, we're just a click away, both Cristi and myself. You can find us on LinkedIn, by email, and we'll be happy to help if we can.
Okay.
Thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you next time. I mean, tomorrow.
Yes.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jerry, and I did